I've got Brian Gault with me this afternoon, and it's unbelievable getting him. Brian, I am trying to think of words to describe you. You're hard to pin down. You're an encourager. You're an author. You're a world traveller. You are an inspiration. You have got an OBE. No, it's not an OBE, it's an MBE.
What an introduction! It's going to be hard to follow all of this.
But the first thing, and I'm sure there's other titles that you could be endowed with.
Oh dear. My head is not going to get out of this conservatory. My head is so big.
But the first thing that
I need a pen to pop my head down, mate.
The first thing that my grandchild would immediately ask you is, that man has no hands. Yeah. How is it that he doesn't have any hands? Over to you, Brian.
Okay, well, Tom, why I have no arms is because way back 61 years ago, my mother went to the doctor and she said, "Doctor, I think I might be pregnant again." You see, Tom, my mum had already had 2 children, my big brother and my big sister. And during both those pregnancies, my mum had shared with me in later years that she struggled with morning sickness.
Right.
And so when she found out she thought she was pregnant again, she went to the doctor. This is when she was expecting me. And she went to the doctor and said, "Doctor, do you have anything that might give me a little bit of relief?" And the doctor said, "Mrs. Gault, I've got this new tablet that just come in, and I think it may be very helpful for you, give you some relief." And so my mum took those tablets, and you know, Tom, she just took just 2 of those tablets.
2 of them.
Just 2. For some reason, I don't know why, I'm so glad she didn't take more, but because of those 2 tablets called Thalidomide, that 8.5 months later in the Jubilee Hospital in Belfast, I was born. And you know, Tom, my birth was different from my big brother and my big sister. Because when my big brother Alan was born, the midwife said to my mum, "Mrs. Gault, you've got a boy." And you know, when my sister Patricia was born, "You've got a girl." But you know, when I came out of the womb, so my mum said, she said, "Brian, I just knew something was different. There was a hush, there was a silence." And you know, I could see that they wrapped you up, Brian, in a wee blanket, and they took you away from me. And my mum said, "Brian, I didn't see you for many, many hours." And you know, my mum would tell me in later years, she said, "Brian, I thought you were dead." But then eventually they brought you to me. And it was only when I took your wee shawl, a wee blanket off your wee shoulders, that I found out why all the commotion, that you had no arms. And she said at the time, Brian, in a strange way, it was a relief that you were alive. Yes, it was a big shock that you had no arms, but it was just at that time, she said, "Brian, I was just so glad that you were with us." And it was hard. And you know, I don't often share this story, but you know, Tom, because of my shoulders are quite pointy. And sadly, as I came out of the womb, Tom, I actually ripped the inside of my mum. And she lost several pints of blood. We're talking about 61 years, 1961.
Right.
And you know, my mum said, Brian, for a short time, it was touch and go whether my mum would survive. But thankfully, they replaced the units or pints of blood that she'd lost. And she told me, Brian, I stayed in the hospital for about 10 days after you were born. And then when I was strong enough, I went back home to Ballyclare, where we had a little small holding. I don't think you really got a farm as such. We had some pigs and ducks and geese and hens running around. But you know, they kept me in the hospital, Tom, for at least another 2 weeks, because they were doing all these further tests on me, putting all these needles and things into my legs and into my body to see if I had any internal injuries. And my mum used to come up to see me, Tom. She said, Brian, I used to come up from Ballylinny, Ballyclare, a couple of times a week to see you. And she said, Brian, one day when I came up to see you, after about 2 weeks, said, one day when I came up to see you, one of the nurses said to my mum, Mrs. Gault, you've got a terrible wean. She said, your Brian will not stop crying from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. We know he's got a good pair of lungs. And you know, my mum just couldn't understand, Tom. Why was I crying so much? And she said, Brian, I looked at you in your wee cot from head to toe, and then I found the problem. Do you know what the problem was? My bottom. My bottom was as red as flesh. It was raw. And my mum was furious. And she said, when the next nurse came by, she said, Nurse, if you had a bottom as red as my Brian's, you'd be screaming from first thing in the morning to last thing at night. And my mum went, right, I'm taking my Brian home. And you know, she said, she wrapped me all up and she stormed out of the hospital there in Belfast and she got on the bus for Ballyclare. And you know, Tom, when we got home to the farm, she said, Brian, I opened up the medicine cabinet. I got out the zinc and the Vaseline. And she said, Brian, for the next week, I lashed that ointment onto your wee bottom. Wasn't that good, Tom?
Absolutely.
Well, I thought it was.
Absolutely.
You know, for the first time, my mum said, I had a smile. And you know why I begin with that wee story in my life? Is because of the bonding, Tom, the acceptance between my mum and myself. You see, Tom, it would be more than a year after I was born before my mum and dad would get some answers. That was because of those 2 tablets that my mum took in those very early stages of her pregnancy that stopped my arms from growing. And also I found out around the world there's about 10,000 thalidomiders. In the UK there were about 550 today. Here we are in 2023. There are 436 of us are still alive. But you know, back then about 30% of the 10,000, about 3,000 of them, the babies were put into institutions or they were adopted. Tom, I am so delighted that my mum said and my dad said, Brian, when we saw you in that wee cot and saw that wee smile on your face, Brian, we couldn't help but love you. And we wanted to encourage you and nurture you. And you know, that was the beginning. Yes, my mum had a nervous breakdown, Tom. It was a big shock for her. But she adjusted. And you know, there was a lovely neighbour, a lady called Lily Bell. And Lily Bell just came up the lane one day. She'd heard about Mrs. Gault had a wee baby, our 3rd child. And you know, she saw me before my mum saw me, because I must have been sitting out in the yard. And she saw me and she shouted to my mum and said, Isabel, is that Brian? And you know, Tom, in those days I had lots of curly blonde hair. And she said, isn't Brian cute? Isn't he lovely? And you know, Tom, my mum never expected anybody to say anything nice about me. You see, my mum thought that the neighbours would be gossiping and would be interrogating my mum with these awkward and difficult questions that my mum had no answers for at that time. But you know, my mum said to me in later years that Lily Bell was the friend, the neighbour she needed in those days and weeks and months after I was born. She was a lovely friend and a lovely listener. You see, my mum wasn't ready for lots of questions. And I know there were times my mum needed a shoulder to cry on. And you know, Lily Bell, the neighbour, was there for my mum. And you know, Tom, my mum was given some advice, especially when I got that wee bit older. And the advice that my mum was given was not to do everything for me. She was advised that you'd have to stand back and to watch me struggle. Learning to use these here, my toes. I say today to people, the only time these are my feet are when I walk. The rest of the time, these are my hands. And you know, my mum used to say, Brian, from a very early age, even when you're in your cot, she said, but I couldn't believe how you lifted yourself up in your cot. You know, you had no arms and you had a little teddy. And she said, Brian, when your brother Alan and Patricia had one, they had it in between their wee hands. But Brian, you just had it in between your toes and you just cuddled it up like this, you know, in your cot. And she said, Brian, when I saw you doing all those things, then when you got that wee bit older, you just grabbed your wee rattler in your toes and you could shake it with your feet. And you know, and it just after a while, anything that was reached to me, my toe went out and grabbed it. Whereas, you know, for a child who had arms, they would have put out their hands to grab something or moving around. But when I got that wee bit older, and I remember I was probably about 2 or 3, and I was obviously beginning to walk by then. But I remember one day when Lily Bell come up the lane, up to the house, and I ran out along the lane to see her. Those days there was very little traffic. Yes. There was no cars. There was maybe 1 or 2 tractors, maybe a bread van, and maybe a postman, and that was all you'd ever had. Back in nearly 62, 63. But Lily Bell came up the lane, and then when I saw her, I went and I grabbed her arm with my chin, my shoulder. I brought her into the house, and do you know what she had, Tom? She had some sweets, some sweeties. And she gave me one, and I took it in my toes, just like this, Tom.
Right.
And with my toes,
right.
With a wrapping paper on it, I just pulled it like that, got it in between my toes like that, Tom, and up like this, just like that. You know, here I am, I'm 61, and I can still do it.
Still do it.
And, but you know, when I did that at that time, do you know, she said to my mum, isn't Brian amazing? Isn't Brian clever? And you know, my mum never expected those words ever to be said about her Brian. And you know, my mum used to share that wee story and many others like that because she clung on to those, you know, with hope.
Yes.
That Brian, maybe in the future,
yes.
he will be able to have a fulfilled life,
yes.
and an active life. But you know what was a big turning point in my life, Tom? Was when I was 2 and 3 months old. I've got a picture here today to show people who are watching. This is a wee picture of me. That is me, Tom.
Right.
When I was 2 and 3 months old. And you know, when I was that age, I was told that I was going to Scotland.
Right.
To Edinburgh. And you know, as a wee boy living in Ballyclare, I thought that Edinburgh was the next village.
Yes.
And Mum and Dad took me over to Scotland. And you know, when we got to the hospital, the Princess Margaret Rose Hospital, we were only there a couple of hours, Tom, when Mum and Dad said goodbye.
Oh dear.
And you know, I thought they were only going away for a couple of hours. They'd be back soon. But Tom, I wouldn't see them again for the next 10 weeks. I was only 2 and 3 months old. Tom, I didn't know what the word abandonment meant. But that's how I felt. Mum and Dad said they loved me. But if they loved me, why had they left me in a strange hospital with strange people that I didn't know? In a strange environment. And do you know, I used to cry myself every night on my pillow when I was falling asleep. And I was only just settling in at the hospital about a week when they took me down into the clinic, Tom. And the doctor and the nurse started to put this stuff onto my chest and my back,
yes.
onto my torso. For those who are watching here, some of them may have broken an arm or a leg and had a plaster cast put on.
Right.
Well, that's what they were putting onto my chest and back. And when it hardened, the doctor and the nurse came in with this electric cutter.
Yes.
A bit like the noise of when you go to the dentist with a drill.
Yes, yes.
It was going and you know, Tom, I was going, boys, I thought I was going to die. Do you know whose words I wanted to hear that day, Tom?
Yes.
The words of my mum.
I know.
I wanted my mum to say, Brian, it's okay. No harm's going to come to you. And for her to put her wee arms around me and to give me a cuddle. But you know, the doctor and nurse with that electric cutter went down the back where your spine is, and they just went through the plaster cast, went zzz, right down to the bottom, and they took off gently off that plaster cast. And you know, over the next couple of weeks, the engineers at the hospital would be making my first pair of arms. You see, when I was told that I was going to Scotland to get my arms, you see, my wee mind as a wee boy of 2 and a bit years of age, I thought I was going to get real arms.
Yes.
Because that's what, oh, you're going to get your arms. And yet, you know, when I got to 3 weeks later, this is the kind of arms that they put onto my shoulders. Maybe if I raise it up.
Yeah.
The problem is it does fall over a wee bit.
That's fine.
Hopefully you can see it.
Yeah.
But that there's the arms. Okay, I'm about 10 going on 11 in that picture. But Tom, the arms did not really change very much over the years. And you imagine having them there put onto your shoulders. And those watching may say, Brian, how on earth did they work those metal arms? Well, they had shoulder pads on them.
Yes.
And as I moved my shoulders up and down, the arms went up and down, in and out. And across my chest there was a strap. And that strap kept the arms on me. But also, as I breathed in and out, if I breathed out, the hooks would open. And when I breathed in, it stayed closed.
Right.
So the problem was sometimes when they put maybe a spoon or a fork or a pencil or a crayon inside the hook. Sometimes, especially when I was eating, they put a spoon in and I had some food on the spoon and I was trying to work my shoulder muscles and my breathing here. And sometimes I just got it up to my mouth like this here with the hook.
And then you breathed out.
And I breathed out. And all the food would fall onto the table or onto the floor and the spoon, and it'd be a splatter or whatever. And the perspiration would be coming down my face because of it was a lot easier for me. Here, I've got here, obviously, a pen here, and just imagine that's a spoon. Like for me to do this with my toes, I can eat a lot quicker. Whereas doing it with these arms, it was taking me something that I could eat in 10 minutes. It would be taking maybe an hour with those metal arms. And I, as a wee boy, Tom, I just couldn't understand why all this effort. And it was sore. They were uncomfortable and they were heavy. And I had to learn to walk again when I had the metal arms on. And I had to keep making all these tweaking and all the shoulder pads and this and that and other. And I was there all together for 10 weeks. And then one day, Tom, Mum and Dad came back. And when my father came into the room, Tom, I got up and I ran over and I jumped into his arms. But when I looked at him, no. Tom, I was cross. Where had he been for the last 10 weeks? You see, when you're a wee boy of 2
you don't understand.
I couldn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, the time and the distance, and I just said, I was so cross with my dad, and he had some sweeties for me, but I wouldn't take one because I was so cross. And my mum would say, Brian,
oh dear.
The first time she saw me, my mum said, the first time I saw you, Brian, with those wee metal arms on your wee shoulders, Brian, I couldn't stay in the room. She said, Brian, your daddy and I were left the room, and she said, Brian, many tears came trickling down my cheeks. And your daddy and I began to question, what have we done? Leaving our Brian here, and look how sad he is with those arms. But they came to see me for a reason. They'd come to take me home. Back to Ballyclare.
Happy days.
As a wee boy, I went, yes, yippee! Mum and Dad still love me. Mm-hmm. And it was the words I wanted to hear. They loved me. We're taking you home, Brian. And when we got home to the farm, word of mouth got around the community that I was back with my bionic arms. And I don't know why, Tom, but some of the boys and girls, They came to see me and to see the arms on me. And some of the children, I don't know why, but they stuck their wee fingers in the wee hooks of the arms. And their wee fingers, I wouldn't let go of their fingers. And they were going blue, nearly as blue as my shirt.
Yes, yes.
And then they were going home and telling their mums and dads about Brian and those terrible arms. And their mums and dads said, well, you shouldn't have stuck your fingers in the hook in the first place. But you know, there was a novelty factor, Tom, for the first 6 months or so. I was showing off what these arms could do. But you know, they weighed me down.
Yes.
They discouraged me.
Right.
I struggled. And the other thing was, Tom, was just before we left the first time from Scotland, from the hospital, the professor said to my mum and dad, try and get me to wear those arms for up to 8 hours. Try to build it up to about 8 hours a day.
Right.
And you know, those arms, they were heavy. They were cumbersome. And if you fell with them on, they kind of dug into my shoulders.
Right.
And I came out in blisters and wheals and cuts and bruises. And I just couldn't understand. And I would be crying. And even when the other boys and girls were out running around, I wanted to go out and play in the fields with them. But when you had the arms on, I couldn't keep up with them.
Yeah.
And I was falling over and hurting myself. And I was coming home with buckets of tears coming down. And the first thing Mum and Dad would say, right, get those arms off. And the minute the arms were off, I felt, yes, I can go out and I can run around with the other children. And so that was what happened. But you know, there were other things Mum and Dad tried to encourage me to do. And I've already mentioned it, things like obviously feeding myself.
Right.
You see, I was saying about how my mum had to stand back and watch me struggle. Even things like, I shared obviously there, you know me, how I feed myself with my toes.
Yes.
But you know, I used to look at the animals on the farm, because me even doing that as a wee boy, I used to get these awful pains in my legs. We call them cramps.
Yeah.
And I used to look at the pigs on the farm, Tom.
Yes.
And they had no arms. And they had no problems feeding themselves. And we had Laddie the dog, and he had no arms too. And I thought as a wee boy when I was 3 or 4, I thought, well, it was good enough for the animals. It's good enough for me. And you know, Tom, I used to stick my head down into the plate. And you know, with my tongue, I used to slurp up all the food, lick it all up with my tongue. And you know, my big brother Alan, my sister Patricia used to say, it's not fair. If there's any extra food, any seconds, Brian's plate was always clean first. And also, Tom, sometimes when the neighbours came around, especially at meal times, Mum and Dad didn't have to say a word to me. They just looked over to me, Tom, and I had to get the spoon or the fork in between my toes, get my wee leg up onto the table. In those days, obviously, we had a wee lower table as well, obviously, because my legs weren't long enough to get up to the big tall, high table. But, no, to be able to bring it up like this here up to my mouth. But you may say, Brad, did you always do that? You see, in those early days, yes, when I got to school, I had physiotherapy and occupational therapy. But even in those early days, Tom, because my brother and sister, Pat and Alan, were reaching things over to me, I was just lifting them up in my toes. Okay, I wasn't as accurate and steady as I can do now with my toes, but even in those early days, I was just naturally picking things up with my feet. And so it came natural to me in those early days, just using my toes as if they were my hands. And
right.
So that was those early days. But another thing I had to learn, happen, Tom, was that there was over 20, probably about 25 to 28 thalidomiders in Northern Ireland. And about a dozen, maybe 15, 20 of us used to go to a play school up at the Jubilee, one of the wee Nissen huts,
right,
up at the Jubilee Hospital. And it was a wee preschool. And it was where it helped my mum because she met other mums.
Yes.
Who had children similar to myself with other disabilities. Mm-hmm. And in a way that was good, that they all could have a chat with each other and encourage one another and learn from one another. And one of the wee things they learnt in those early days was even things like, how do you help your child to dress themselves?
Right.
No, even just things like, see here with my shirt on.
Yes.
See, in those early days, my mum would have been encouraged to put a zip or Velcro,
Yes.
where the buttons would be.
Yes, of course.
And there would be maybe a wee bit of string. And with my toes, Tom, I could get my toe in the string and I could pull it down and then bring it back up again. I brought it to my mouth and then I could pull it up with my mouth. But you know, one day, Tom, before I got the zip and the Velcro on the shirt, I got the shirt. And I took me ages, Tom, but you know, I put all the buttons, except for the very top one, in with my toes. It took me ages, but I did it. And you know, I got that shirt, Tom, and I put it over the bed. And as if I was standing up like this here, and I put it over the bed, and there was a chair. And as I opened it up at the bottom, because I had the buttons all in, and I bent over like this, Tom, and I got underneath like that there. And when I got so far, Tom, I went shaker, shaker, shaker. And I got that shirt on. But you know what used to happen sometimes, Tom? The buttons would be round the back instead of the front.
Oh dear.
But you know, there's not too many benefits of having no arms. But one day I realised if I did a big swish like that, really fast, spin round, the buttons went from the back round to the front. But you know, I'm now 61 years of age. And there's one word I was never allowed to use. Mum and Dad would never let me use it, and they never, definitely not at school. Was never say the word can't or cannot.
Yes.
But try. Look at your potential and not your limitations. Well, I didn't really understand all that until later years, but keep trying, Brian. And you know, they wanted me to keep persevering, keep trying. And so, and that's what I did. But you know, one day, I got that shirt, and one time I just threw it up in the air, Tom.
Yes.
And because I thought if I threw it up in the air, it would open up like a parachute. And I could run around and I could get my wee head underneath it. And but then I've already just said about eventually I put it over the bed and I got my head underneath it and on shaking it and I got it on. There were so many challenges, Tom. Even things like, I remember even my wee trousers. Do you know, in those early days, one of the things they used to do, like, they used to put these braces, like maybe your granddad would have, on your shoulders.
Yes.
So, and they had a little hook on the wall, and I used to get one of the braces onto this shoulder, and then I would turn round, and I'd get this here one onto this shoulder. But just as I was getting the second one on, I'd go bang, like this here, spring away up, and up, and it would snap down here. And they tried all these different things to help me. But you know, one wee story I do want to share with you is, this is preschool now. My mum shared that there were times, because when I was very young, when I was only probably about maybe 18 months, 2 years old, I used to go through a wee pair of trousers nearly every couple of weeks, because I was bumping around in the yard on my bottom.
Right.
And word of mouth got around the community about Isabel and her Brian. You know, he's going through all these trousers.
Right.
And one wee lady, a lovely wee lady, she came one day with an old coat. We're talking about the early 60s here, about 1962, 63. And my mum shared this with me. She said, Brian, this lady came with this old coat. She said, Isabel, you can make a good well-worn pair of trousers. These here last hopefully, Brian, a wee bit longer than normal.
Yes. And
she made me my coat trousers, and they were a bit rough and ready, but they did the job. And but you know, when I went up to Belfast to the play school, I had to get my bestest trousers on.
Right.
Look smart for going up to be with the other children. So I got the bestest trousers on. But you know, when we came back home to Ballyclare to the farm, off came the bestest trousers, and on went the old coat trousers. And my mum said one day she was in the kitchen doing a bit of baking, and she said, Brian, it was a wee bit too quiet in the sitting room. And she said she just looked around the corner into the sitting room, and she said she saw me going over to the drawer where the bestest trousers were kept. And she said, Brian, with your teeth, you pulled open the drawer, you got out the bestest trousers. And she said, Brian, you're only probably about 18 months, 2 years old. She said, Brian, I watched you and you didn't know I was watching you. But Brian, I was watching you as you wriggled and got off the old coat trousers. And she said, Brian, you got them off. And then you got the best trousers and you wriggle. And she said, Brian, the perspiration was coming down your face, but you were determined. And you got them on. She said, Brian, it took you probably half an hour, 40 minutes, but you got them on. And she said she came into the room and she went like this. She went, not with her feet, but with her hands.
No.
She said, Brian, well done. Aren't you clever? But you know what she did next, Tom? She took them off me. She took them off me after all that effort. She said, Brian, I'm sorry, but I have to keep those good trousers for going to the play school. And so you can imagine I had a temper tantrum. My heels were banging on the floor that day. I was cross. But my mum would share, Tom, that story with all the neighbours, because with affection and late years, because she never imagined that I would be determined I was going to get those wee Festus trousers on. We're going to have to move on here in the story. Because, Tom, in 1967, my family went for a holiday to the Isle of Man.
Right.
Yes. and by that time, I had a younger sister, Gwen. So she was my younger sister. So there's 4 of us. I'm the third. And we were there in Douglas. And that wasn't easy for my mum, because we went down onto the beach there in Douglas, and there was all the other boys and girls, and I was probably, what age would I have been? I'll probably have been, so 67, I've been about 5 and a half, 6 maybe at that time. And I was running around just in my wee swimming trunks on, but my mum was so conscious
of everybody looking,
staring. And she said to me, lady, she said, Brian, I ran over the promenade. Obviously she looked both ways, but she ran over to the wee guest house, and she came back with lots of wee t-shirts and wee things to cover me up. And I think because in Ballyclare, where we lived in the wee farm, all the boys and girls knew me and accepted me and all the rest of it. And they accepted Brian, the boy. But because the children, and it was natural for them, Tom, they'd never seen a child with no arm
obviously not.
And but normally when you say to children, oh, I was born with no arms, and oh, Brian used his feet, that would be it. But I think at that time my mum, it was a reality check, and it was a shock to her, because you know what actually also came in that holiday? My metal arms. They came on holiday too, but the agreement with my mum and dad at that time was I had them on for my breakfast, because my mum and dad wanted me to show off and show everybody how clever I was at taking my breakfast, my cereal with my metal arms. But mum and dad said, Brian, once you've done that, they're off for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So I thought that was great. But that was for my mum and dad, just the reality. Hey, Brian's 5, 6 years of age here, but hey, what kind of future is he going to have?
Yeah.
But you know, Tom, that holiday in 1967 had a big impression on my parents. I'm just going to have a wee mouthful of water here before.
Yes, turn away.
But because of that holiday in 1967, Tom, 3 years later, it had a big impression on my parents, because 3 years later, in the May of 1970, we sold up the wee small holding. We moved away from Ballyclare, and we all 6 of us, mum and dad and all 4 of us, and myself and 3 siblings, moved to Douglas.
Right?
Yes, where my mum and dad got a wee guest house. What a change from having a wee small holding.
Absolutely.
Big change, obviously a big adventure for all of us. And you know, Tom, it was no problem for Alan or Patricia or Gwen to get into a wee primary school in the greater Douglas area. But mum and dad took me along to 4 wee primary schools in the greater Douglas area.
No, wouldn't.
And more or less all the head teachers in all the schools said more or less the same thing, Tom, to my mum and dad. Mr. and Mrs. Gault, there's no school in the Isle of Man, this is 1979, will have your Brian.
Mm-hmm.
They said that I would need special training, special education, and that I would either have to go to Liverpool, to a special needs school there, or come back here to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, where I'd already been going to a school from 1966 up in Belfast called Fleming Fulton School.
Right.
And so the Isle of Man Education Authority approached the Belfast Education Authority and said about Brian. He'd already been going along to Fleming Fulton. They had a boarding section at the school.
Right.
At that time, in 1970, there were 220 children, and there were 40 children who were boarders. And they approached him and asked him, would they accept me? And they said yes.
Wow.
And I was only eight and a half years of age.
Right.
You know, in 1970. And that wasn't easy, Tom. You know, for my mum and dad, it must have been hard for them, because it meant now that I would be away for 9 months every year.
Yeah.
I'd only be going home for 2 weeks at Christmas, 2 weeks at Easter, and the 2 months, July and August, for the summer holidays.
Right.
The rest of the time I'd be at school. And for a wee boy, for me, that was hard, being away from my family. I was homesick.
Of course.
But also, Tom, no longer could I cheat, because when I was on the farm, I would only have those arms on maybe for 20 minutes a day.
Okay, right.
20 minutes was maximum all I wanted to have those arms on.
I know.
Rather than the 8 hours a day. Whereas now at school,
All the time.
Monday to Friday.
Mm.
And because I wasn't used to Tom having them on all the time, my shoulders and all were coming out all these blisters and wheals and cuts and bruises. And you know, at times I used to bash my arms up against walls and things to try to see if I could break them. I was desperate, Tom, because I had to go over to Edinburgh about every 4 to 6 months, because I was growing out of them.
Readjust them.
Yes, a bit like a pair of shoes. You know, you keep growing out of them.
Yes,
I was growing out of it. And obviously a few alterations, a few modifications and improvements, so-called improvements. And these were powered by gas cylinders.
Right.
So we cylinders, I think maybe this here one on, there we are. That there's the back of the arm. So
Right.
there's a wee cylinder there, and the back of them there you can see.
Yes, I got that.
Yeah, and all the wires, you can see all the wires there. Well, that's what powered these arms. So every time I moved my shoulders and my stomach muscles to open and close the hooks, that's what actually worked it. So you can imagine having those on. See, when you had them on, I would have had a shirt and a jumper over the top of them.
Yes.
You know, that's how.
Yes.
And that's how they looked, and they were very uncomfortable. But and so people asked me, Tom, did I have any struggles? I've already mentioned about the arms, and yes, being homesick, and another one of the struggles I would have had would have been Sunday afternoons. Sunday afternoons is when you got a pencil or pen and a wee letter notepad, and you wrote home to your mums and dads. I'll not say, Tom, that during the rest of the week I forgot about my mum and dad, but you were so preoccupied with the things of school life.
Yeah.
You know, education, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, all those things that had to be there, learning new skills with my toes, new challenges. But it was that hour normally it was between 2 and 3 or 3 and 4, I had to write home. And I would be writing home, dear mum and dad, I'm missing you. Dear mum and dad, I love you. Mum and dad, when am I coming home? And it was not easy. I'm missing everyone. And but you know, I found it hard, and it was hard when I got letters back from them. You see, those are the days before text messages and Zoom
Oh, absolutely.
and Skype and all. We're talking about the 1970s here. And it was in the height of the Troubles too here in Northern Ireland. But I was in South Belfast in the Malone Road, so the Upper Malone Road. So it was quite a quietish area, though there was a couple of stairs. You know, there was a place called the Dub Stores just down from near the playing fields. Playing fields down that area. But there was a wee place there. There was a couple of wee shops, and there was an explosion in one of them one time. And some of the glass was shattered, and but they had them all taped up, so it just didn't all come in. But thankfully we were reasonably sheltered. No, we didn't have anything too bad at the school. Although I heard lots of bad things that happened to some of the children who the day pupils. Minibuses used to come for them, and hear about sometimes school had to finish early because of
to get them home.
Terrible things that were happening. But anyway, that was in the 70s. But I was really struggling, and emotionally, you know, and physically, and even probably psychologically, were all the things that were going on. And but you know, when I went home in the summer months, when I was probably 10, see this picture here, when I was 10, 11, I was going home to the Isle of Man, and in the summer months, lots of the children around my age, when I was 10, no, about 8, 9, 10, the children in the Isle of Man in the summer months, they'd be laughing at me, Tom.
Yes.
And teasing me and saying not nice words and knocking me over. And I couldn't understand, why were these children not being very nice to me? And saying not nice words and not being my friends. And one day one of the children knocked me over, Tom. And I did something I know I should never have done. I went home and I said, Mum and Dad, I think I might put my arms on today. This is the summer months here.
Yes.
I only maybe had them on 2 or 3 times in the summer months, the whole summer. And I said, I'm putting them on. And I got the arms on, and I went out and I sought after the
boy,
child,
right,
who had knocked me over.
Yes.
And you know, Tom, when they got within my reach,
you welted them.
I went up to them and I went, boom! With a good right hook of those metal arms.
Oh, wow.
And I knocked them over. I don't know whether I knocked them out or not, but I knocked them over. And you know, I never looked. I went home, I ran home with the arms on, and I went in the house and said, Mommy, Daddy, I think I've done something terrible. And they said, Brian, what on earth have you done? I said, I think I've knocked one of the kids out with the right hook of the arms. They said, what? Brian, you don't do that. And they said, Brian, you have to go and say sorry. Sorry to the child and to their parents. And I have to be honest, Tom, that day, I wasn't really sorry, but I had to go and say sorry. I know today, I know I shouldn't have done it, but I did. And another thing I did sometimes, Tom, I used to also give out Glasgow kisses.
Oh boy, so.
Oh boys. And you know, what happened was, and some people might know what a Glasgow kiss is.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll tell you, but you see, what happened was that sometimes some of the kids kept winding me up and said, Brian, why, for the 100th time, do you have no arms?
Mm-hmm.
And all I could say was my mummy took 2 tablets when I was in her tummy, and it stopped my arms from growing. And so one day I went up to one of the kids, and I went up to him, I went boom,
boom.
With the headbutt, and I knocked him out. And I said to myself, they'll not ask me again in a hurry.
No.
Why? I've got no arms. You see, that was my way of coping. And another thing I used to say, I said to them sometime, I'll get the drill after you, the electric drill. And that was my shoulder.
Right.
Because I used to say the bonio, I used to call it the bonio, the drill of the bonio. And it was just a mechanism, it was my way of trying to protect myself.
Yeah.
And try to be a big, kind of strong, I'm all right, protect myself. And because I was struggling as a wee boy, knowing how to verbalise, be able to communicate and express how I was really feeling. But you know, when I was this age, when I was 10, going on 11, Tom, that was when I was at my lowest point. And I remember saying, God, if you exist, God, I don't like you. Because you've made me different from all the other boys and girls. Why do I have to struggle with these arms, metal arms, that pull me down physically and emotionally and psychologically? And also, yes, I can do things with my toes, but it takes me longer to do things. And I'm away from my family so much, and I miss them. And you know, Tom, when I was 10, going on 11, I remember saying, God, is it worth me going on with my life? I didn't want to go on with my life. If I was always going to have all these struggles for the rest of my days, and none of my teachers would really be listening, or the occupational therapists, or the physiotherapists, or the professors in Scotland. But I know that those who are watching in today wouldn't want me to finish my story on a sad note.
No.
Because, Tom, my 13th year, 1974, I call the best year in my life. Well, there are other good things happening in later years, but at that time I thought, yes, because that year, two things happened that I definitely want to share. Well, I'll maybe share another one first. Actually, the first one I'll share with them is about swimming. Because something happened in just a year before, in 1993. Because when I was 7, I learned to swim.
Right.
And that was actually in a hydro pool. They had a hydro pool up there in Scotland at the Prince of Margaret Rose Hospital. So what happened was at the weekend, during the week they had like a chalet place, all one level, where all the children with disabilities came together and they got their prosthetics, whether upper limbs or lower limbs. And then at the weekend they closed the chalet down and they went down into the hospital in the children's ward. And so what sometimes they did was they let us go to a hydro pool and just get a wee bit of relaxation, you know, a wee bit of... And actually, when I was 7, that's how I learned to swim. And what they did, they put this horseshoe ring, brown rubber ring round my neck, Tom. And so I was lying on my back, and I used to paddle with my toe like this, or I did the frog kick like that on my back.
Yes, yes.
And that's how I learned to swim, with this round my neck.
Right.
But you know, I've got good strong legs, Tom.
Right.
And the hydro pool's only a wee small thing. You know, for me, a couple of kicks, and I was from one end to the other.
Right.
And one day I kicked really hard, Tom, and you know what happened? The horseshoe ring fell off my neck, and I went